I want to bring in NBC's Yamiche Alcindor covering the White House. Nicholas Kristof is an author and columnist for the New York Times and previously served as bureau chief in Beijing. Lindsay Owens is executive director at Groundwork Collaborative, and NBC's Christine Romans is with me here in studio. Christine, looking at the markets, it's pretty clear investors don't think we're out of the woods yet, in spite of what happened yesterday. How much of a concern is China?
It's a big concern, and that's what markets are focusing on today. Yesterday, the focus was on the pausing of those big so-called reciprocal tariffs. But then today, the fog clears a little bit, and it's very clear you have a tense and deteriorating situation with China. And these huge, huge duties that are payable basically now and in the days ahead for so many businesses that are importing goods from China. And some of those goods are components and other things that other manufacturers make. So watching that there, I would just point out that the Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 8% from where it was before President Trump announced his so-called Liberation Day in the Rose Garden. That's a big move in just a few days.
And Lindsay, if economic turmoil forced the president's hands yesterday, do you see a similar risk around the U.S.-China war? I mean, could it force the president to reverse these tariffs or cut a deal sooner rather than later?
Yeah, we're really in a lose-lose scenario here. We're going to get all of the pain of these policies in the short term. We're going to get the price hikes across the economy. We're going to get the increase in recession risk. And because the president is so volatile in his decision making, I don't think we're going to get the medium or long-term benefits. If you're a manufacturer looking to make a big capital investment in the United States right now, that's got to pencil out over a medium to long-term horizon. It is impossible to believe that the president is going to stay the course when he blinked after just a week on the reciprocal tariffs. So I think it's a real lose-lose here, where we're going to get all of that short-term pain that the president has promised us. According to reporting earlier today, he was totally fine putting the American economy into a recession, just not a depression. But we're also, I think, increasingly unlikely to get that medium to long-term growth in manufacturing in the United States that they were hoping for.
So, Nicholas, I want to play what the director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett, said just this morning.
There's going to be a lot of disruption for China right now because they've been dumping cheap goods into the U.S. And doing so, I think, as a strategy that has national defense implications. And so what's going on right now with China is that the ships that are filled with Chinese products don't know where to go. They're stuck in port. The factories that are making the Chinese goods are going to have to slow down because they don't have ships to load the stuff into. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on China to stop its bad acting and to come to the table.
Well, maybe disruption for China, Nick, but also for Americans who are watching their 401ks disappear or who are rushing out to buy a cell phone that they didn't think that they needed. They're so worried about price hikes. So let me ask you this from your experience and background with China. Do you see signs or anything that you know about him, that President Xi will bow to the pressure to come to the table? Are we to believe we don't back down is just rhetoric?
So Xi Jinping and Donald Trump are actually very similar in a lot of ways. I mean, they have these authoritarian personalities. They're very self-confident, unreasonably so. And I think that they both feel that they need to go head-to-head and are unlikely to back down. That was one reason why Xi Jinping, raised the tariffs immediately rather than trying to work out some deal. But both sides are going to suffer enormously. I mean, Kevin Hassett is absolutely right that there will be disruption in a Chinese economy that is already pretty weak. Meanwhile, U.S. importers are going to suffer a lot. U.S. consumers are going to suffer a lot. And I don't think, Chris, that we've focused enough on the non-trade ways in which China can inflict pain on the U.S., by slowing down or cutting off rare earth exports, which are crucial for so much of the American economy, for the military base, potentially dumping treasuries in ways that would be really bad for the bond market and for the dollar. And, by ending cooperation on fentanyl production and precursors in ways that could lead to really cheap fentanyl in the U.S. and a lot more pain on that front as well.
In fact, Nick, your paper reports today that she was not about to be caught by surprise on tariffs, as they were in Trump's first term. And they had years to prepare for this. So how much pain can China and Xi Jinping put on U.S. and U.S. consumers?
Well, I mean, China's going to suffer as well, but they may have a greater capacity as a completely undemocratic country to suffer that pain than the U.S. does. You know, here in the U.S., obviously consumers are going to pay an awful lot more. I'm speaking to you right now on a laptop that was assembled in China. You know, my iPhone. You go into you buy something on Amazon. Those are, you know, so much of that is made in China. Right now, retailers are trying to order for the Christmas season. And how are they supposed to place orders when they have no idea what the tariffs are going to be in the fall when goods are actually arriving on ships? So, you know, I think there's just going to be a lot of cancellation, a lot of uncertainty. And it's noteworthy, Chris, that economic forecasters think it's more likely there'll be a recession in the U.S. than in China.
Lindsay, important point. Earlier today, Gene Sperling, who, as you know, served as the National Economic Advisor for Presidents Clinton and Obama, gave his take on Trump's approach to all this.
Unlike a real estate transaction that he's used to, where maybe it's a zero-sum game, you know, if the United States gets more, somebody else gets less. When you get into a trade war, particularly one that's not particularly well thought out or where it's not clear what the path to an agreement is, you get to a zero-sum game. You get to a situation where one side might lose more than the other, but everyone's going to lose.
Well, I mean, that kind of reiterates the point you made earlier. And of course, the trade between the U.S. and China has been mutually beneficial for a long time. Is there a path that you see to go from lose-lose to win-win?
Yeah, I mean, Gene is exactly right. American consumers are really poised to bear an incredible brunt of this trade war. An analysis that was released earlier today suggests that the average family could experience price hikes of $4,400 a year. I mean, this is an immense amount of increased cost for families who have told us for years now that their top priority for lawmakers in Washington is to reduce their costs. And by the way, just earlier today, Republicans in Congress actually passed a budget resolution to basically pull the rug out from under Americans in a recession by slashing the safety net. So I think if we do end up in this sort of nuclear option that Gene is describing, where the economy really plunges into free fall, we're actually less well set up than usual to weather a downturn in the United States. So the amount of risk that the president is asking Americans to bear right now is completely unacceptable. It's why the markets are in free fall. It's why his numbers are very underwater. And we can all just hope that this gets resolved sooner rather than later.
Which leads me to you, Yamiche. What do we know as we're watching the cabinet meeting continue here? What do we know about negotiations going forward and what it is that the president wants from China?
Well, it's an interesting question because President Trump, just a few moments ago, as this cabinet meeting is continuing, the president at the top of this said that he really believes his strategy of tariffs is working and that he has the experience with China to make this a success for the United States and to make money as he believes he did in the first term. Of course, we did see the president reverse those tariffs, and we are now seeing this sort of trade war going on with China. But the president is again trying to, in some ways, tell people just hold on a little bit longer, calling it a transition cost. So take a listen to the context of this, the president talking about his first term in China. Take a listen.
I went 4 years without inflation, and I took in hundreds of billions of dollars from China and others, taxes in China. But we took in hundreds of billions of dollars a year from China, and we had no inflation, essentially. So we think we're in very good shape. We think we're doing very well. Again, there'll be a transition cost, and transition problems, but in the end, it's going to be a beautiful thing.
So what's interesting, as someone who's been watching President Trump very closely and listening to the way that he's talking about increasing costs on Americans, he calls this a transition cost. Before, a few weeks ago, he was calling this short-term pain. What the president is signaling is that things could get worse and that he understands that. And he is in some ways trying to help the American people through what will be costing them more in everything from appliances to groceries. And it's also interesting because, of course, the president ran on this idea, yes, of explaining that he wanted to put tariffs, but he also promised Americans that he was going to lower cost of living here in this country and that he was going to also do something about inflation and make it better. And now, of course, we have the Fed Chair Jerome Powell saying that these tariff transitions and this chaos, that it's going to not only make possibly more likely make inflation worse, but it's also going to slow the U.S. growth. I also want to point out that when we go back to China and the way that this administration is talking about this, because so many things come from China that are coming into the United States, we have J.D. Vance, who is posting online, and here's what he's saying. He's saying there is a category of D.C. insiders who wants to fight an actual war with China, but also wants China to manufacture much of our critical supply. This is insane. President Trump wants peace, but he also wants fair trade and more self-reliance for the American economy. So that's the vice president, in some ways, backing President Trump as things seem to be so volatile here, and as, of course, this trade war with China just continues to intensify, Chris.